So, welcome to another installment of Conversations with Willi. I am honored to have Denise Rushing online today. Denise, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a wonderful day out here.
Yeah, you live in beautiful country up there, Lake Country, right?
Yeah, Lake County, California.
Right on.
Yeah, and it's May, so it's absolutely beautiful here.
Okay, Denise, let's have you introduce yourself and your work and your book, if you would, and we'll start there.
Okay. You mentioned my name, Denise Rushing, and I'm involved in a number of different things. My background's in technology, originally alternative energy and energy technology, and I'm working on. I'm an organic grower here in Lake County. I grow walnuts and a variety of vegetables and herbs. And I ended up running for political office a few years ago and won. Actually, it was a bit of a surprise. I was running on a platform that I wasn't sure that the public would completely buy, but I kind of used the Earth Charter as my platform, and lo and behold, I got elected. And I've been serving ever since, and that's been about little over 4 years now. Um,
What is the office?
it's county supervisor in Lake County, and
Okay.
I'm one member of a five-member board. I would say that I'm probably the most liberal member of the board, and what I've been trying to do is empower community and empower people to uh, step up and take action for themselves. We're a struggling county. We have very high unemployment here, and we have some real challenges environmentally, and we have some challenges socially. And so it's been my goal to try and get folks to really pull together and work on the challenges that we have. And one of the my book, Tending the Soul's Garden, has some examples of using the principles of permaculture in politics and in community building.
Interesting. I talked to a woman named Lisa Fernandez 2 days ago in Maine, and she was not interested in politics. She wanted to do the gardening and the community outreach, but
Yeah.
I think to her the politics was a very tainted, toxic place.
Yeah,
It's
it
interesting.
really is. It very much is, and there's a couple reasons for that. It's hard to maintain balance in a role like this. For one thing, you have a lot of people out there that are absolutely unempowered and project all of their anxieties and their anger and everything else on the leaders in the community. And there's an expectation that leaders have the power to wave a magic wand and fix everything, even though it's been, literally 150 years of, actions that have led to the point that we're at here. And so, folks they feel powerless, they're angry. Anger's growing in politics. And plus you're handed a system that for the most part wants to maintain itself. I personally don't believe that we're going to change the system. I think it's probably more likely the system would change me before I would change it. But I do think that what you get in political life is you get the opportunity to get the word out. So you have the bully pulpit. You can have conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have, and you can. There is a possibility that in a leadership role you can introduce ideas that people might not otherwise hear about. And so one of the things that we've done here is introduce the concept of permaculture and the concept of starting small and growing projects and doing things together that normally people would expect government to do. So,
Mhm. So what are the forces acting against the deployment of permacultural principles?
the
Who's
first,
against it?
well, first of all, I don't think, yeah, I mean, in any kind of political life, um, I don't, if a leader tries to step up and introduce something new, I think in permaculture, Mollison and Holmgren and all talk about every action has a reaction. You have to be aware that you can't just come in with a new idea and have everybody say, "Oh, how wonderful! That's a great new idea. We'll just do that." Uh,
Yeah.
Usually, you get people thinking you're a little bit crazy, and so I find it's easier to not even talk in the language that folks are used to. You have to be the universal translator. So in the world of community and political life, you have to talk about empowering people. You have to talk about self-reliance. You have to talk about localization, local food, and as you do that, I have town hall meetings, for example, in each of the communities on the North Shore of Clear Lake, and we started out the town hall meetings talking about emergency preparedness. These are things you have to find areas of common ground where just about everybody can agree that, you don't want a wildfire to sweep through your community. So you have, and have there be damage. So all edges of the political spectrum can agree that, wildfire destroying things is probably not good, but there's always disagreement as to how to deal with those things, right? So that, one side will say, well, just go out there and cut everything down, and the other side will say, well, maybe there's some, natural things we can do. We could do some tending of the forest as the native peoples used to do, et cetera. So the key is to keep the dialogue open. And there's some areas where you just have so much polarization, you will not get agreement. I mean, I've been working on, for example, on the issue of genetic GMOs for a while, and the community, this is an agricultural community, and the conventional agriculture is really the lifeblood of this economy here, and to try to introduce anything new into that is going to be difficult. And yet there's a transformation underway. I mean, you can't open the Farm Bureau has a newspaper, which if you look at the politics of it, it's just hard to deal with. But at the same time, every time you open the Farm Bureau's paper these days, they're introducing a new concept. For example, did you know that mulching could save water on a farm? So those are, so permaculture kinds of concepts are happening in conventional agriculture slowly but surely. And so to answer your question, I think you have to decide a vision for your community and for yourself, and you have to really maintain some sort of balance as you move forward, and deal with, we talk about zones in permaculture, deal with zone 0, which is your own well-being and your own mental health and your own, capabilities, and then try things on a small scale. And I find that communities can get really excited about certain things. I think one of the articles that you read that introduced you to me was that we had some natural building going on in the public spaces here, and Lindsay Daly wrote a little article for Permaculture International on that. And we introduced that just as building a bench in one of the communities. We built a bench together. The redevelopment agency provided some of the help for that, and when we did that, it turned out to be beautiful, and we ended up with a lot of volunteers that otherwise wouldn't have participated in anything. And it's one of the few structures in that particular community that hasn't been vandalized by the kids, and part of it is because they participated in building it. So we tried that out, and then we're moving on to bigger things.
Interesting. So I'm talking to folks about crash, transition, post-crash, lots of ways to look at the problems that we face now and in the future.
Yeah.
What is if I may, the short answer for you in terms of how you look at how this is going to go down?
There's a lot of predictions about that. I think it's already started, obviously. There's people that are, in our community, there are people that are hungry today. And they're hungry because they can't afford to buy food. And they can't afford, they have food. They can choose between paying their utility bills or buying their medicine or buying food. And so the crash has already begun. We haven't seen, obviously, those who have money are doing fine and they can afford all the necessities of life. But in these small rural communities, we're really struggling. So I think the way it's going to go down probably is that we're going to start to see some shortages, but I think we'll see it before that happens. We're going to see some skyrocketing prices, and people are just trying to figure it out. In our community, we have a lot of barter already. There's been, we're not, like I said, we're not a rich community. Lake County is about 65,000 people. About 14,000 of those have a job. Everybody else is either retired or unemployed and or working in alternative industries, and there's a lot of barter underway right now. And so we've got a good base for that. We have a little group called Transition Lake County, and it's growing by the day. And some of that is celebration, and some of that is just trying to figure things out. We in our community, we have this huge lake right in the middle of the community, so we're really spread out, and most of the development is around Clear Lake, and that's how it's been for over 10,000 years here. The native peoples use the lake for transportation. So there's those who have talked about doing that again, and kind of harkening back to the time when there weren't roads and there weren't cars, and what do you do? But none of that has taken place yet, really. There's a lot of ideas, but not a lot of money to go ahead and implement. So.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
So you talk about principles, values in your book. Whose principles are in play, and how will they change at a high level?
Well, whose principles? It's really, in the end, nature wins. Nature is going to do what nature does, and I think, I'm not sure if it was Holmgren or Mollison that said there's no good or bad, there's just consequences.
Unless you're broke and you're out in the street, then there's bad.
Yeah, well, and also I think you'll find, and this is true around the world, but certainly in rural America, that if people are broke, they're going to find a way to survive, and that may mean an increase in crime. That may mean that the environment takes a hit, and in our area, that's been the case. We have up in our foothills, we've had some real challenges with encampments and people living up there. There's marijuana in the national forest, and folks are finding ways to make their money, there's increasing difficulty with conventional government and law enforcement dealing with the scope of those challenges. So, I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure how things are going to go down. But what I do know is that if you can create a positive alternative, people rally around that. So, for example, Transition Lake County, there's potlucks, and folks are figuring out how to share. We've got a time bank that we're trying to start here. In fact, we're launching that on the 20th of May. We've got people working on community gardens, and there are a number of folks in communities that otherwise couldn't afford the water for their vegetable gardens. We found a way, if you link up with government, we found some government lands that have riparian rights to the lake water, and we can grow a community garden for very little money. So we're trying to find ways where you can link the public interests and the public energies with some other opportunities, and those are I'll call them small projects, but I think they could have some really big impact as time goes on.
Is this the case that the rich people are helping out the poor people, or are the rich people just bunkering down? How do you see the rich here?
In Lake County?
Yeah, whoever the rich are. I don't know how many there are, but there's got to be rich and poor, right?
Yeah, I think there are people with money here, at least in my district. They're not real obvious. But I can tell you that I would say the rich in Lake County is probably typified by the wine industry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we have grape growers here, but our grape growers they're not industrial agriculture size. They've got land, and they've got their estate. And they sell their bottles of wine. I wouldn't call them extremely rich, but I can tell you, for example, Clay Shannon, he's a Shannon Ridge Vineyards. He also runs a label called Vigilance. He's really active in the community. He was actually one of the sponsors of Clark's Island. When people are down there working, he's bringing a case of wine down to them, and he's talking about restoring a wetland in the area, and so as a community, I wouldn't say we're perfect, but I'd say we've got a lot of folks that are willing to step up and participate and get involved with one another. And that was the cornerstone of my original campaign, is we ought to be working together on all this. Now, not to say that there aren't folks that just wish poor people would go away. You have that element out there,
yeah.
And instead, more and more of us are having less and less money. So there is an old saying, though, in Lake County, is that we did not notice the Great Depression. here, and that's because not a whole lot changed during that time. We're fairly isolated. We have a fairly isolated economy, and yet I was only here a year and a half when I ran for public office, so we still have that California sense of anybody's welcome. It's not like some of the areas that you had to have lived there for 30 years to even think about joining a club. Here, I think we were originally, they call us the poor man's Lake Tahoe. We were a vacation spot for those who couldn't afford to go to the hot spots. And now we're a quiet, sleepy little community that doesn't have a lot of vacationing going on, but it's a beautiful lake and it's a beautiful place. So we've got people pulling together, I think.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about some of the stuff I'm working with, including what is sacred, how does sacred relate to permaculture, and how we're developing new songs and symbol for mythologies of permaculture. So why don't we start with what is sacred to you today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm really excited about the work you're doing. To me, all creation is sacred. Earth is sacred. And the human as a part of that is sacred as we enter into it. I think we forget that, and I think we've forgotten it. And I think that permaculture, to me, allows us a path to re-enter. I can't claim that I'm always there either, but I know that when I'm in the flow of permaculture and in the flow of working with nature, with natural principles, whether it's in the garden or whether it's with people in community, I feel something flowing through me that I can only describe as a sacred impulse, a sacred, energy. And I'm not always able to claim I'm in touch with that, but when I am, I'm aware of it. And so for me, permaculture is definitely linked with it's definitely integral to my spirituality. And my spirituality really centers on creation as sacred.
Interesting. Would you say that permaculture has risen to the sort of point where you have a nature religion? Or is that a little stretchy?
Well, I think you could say that. I think the challenge with saying that is that there are a lot of folks that think they know what that means when they say it. They think of, Wicca or pagan, or there's sort of a label that's put on that. And for me, nature and all of creation means everything, everything that's material as well as everything that's spiritual. So I guess you could say it's a nature religion, but it's not necessarily worshiping nature. It's basically becoming part of the flow of all that is and being a part of it as opposed to thinking one is separate from it. And I think of it, in my book I mentioned this too. It's like the human person. If you allow your ego to be totally in charge and you do everything that your ego suggests, the ego isn't really the whole person. The ego, in the end, in the human being, the ego needs to serve the whole person. And I think that's true of the conscious human. The conscious human could be thought of as the ego of creation, of our little Earth planet here. And really the role of the human is to serve as opposed to dominate. And that's a shift that we're not used to. And then serving means allowing the natural forces to really emerge and allow good to come from that. I don't know if that's making any sense, but that's the best I could do at this point.
Well, I respect the fact that you're a politician and a permaculturist at the same time. I can pull your leg.
Yeah, the whole politics thing. Well, I have to tell you, we talked about this earlier, but I'm not comfortable as a politician. I think it's really tough to call myself that. It's also tough to be in that role. But I realize the longer I'm in it, the more I'll probably be a politician. So I have to. I may not last.
Well, a lot of people I'm talking to have left the traditional religious order.
Yeah.
They're no longer a Catholic or whatever.
Yeah.
But I see a void, and I feel for them and for myself because I'm in that void too. I'm trying to get a spiritual place, a practice,
Uh-huh.
um, adoption principles, and I think that's part of what I'm up to.
Right.
Uh, Many of us are up to try to reconstruct something that's valuable and vibrant
Right.
without lots of labels and lots of judgment.
Exactly. And there's a lot of truth out there in every mode. You know, I was involved, you probably know this, I was involved in helping co-found a spirituality center in House Springs, Missouri called Rock Haven. And it's interfaith, but the idea was to bring some sort of ritual because we as humans need that. Symbols speak louder than words to us, and having ritual and practice matters. So that, you know, part of Rockhaven's mission was to try to do that and do it in the context of those who have this background in Christianity or a background in the other faith traditions. But and they draw on all of the faith traditions. They draw on Christian, on Buddhist, indigenous. In fact, there was a woman who would do the medicine wheel and that. But none of them yet sort of speak to the moment that we're in at this point. We're sort of grabbing at all of them. But I agree. We're creating something new.
Yes. I've checked out the Northern Convergence website.
Uh-huh.
Have, I guess, been invited to do a workshop, but I'm not just sure that's the case yet. But I'm not just sure I see a lot of spirituality or ritual in the convergence process.
Uh-huh.
I see a lot of technicians, soil scientists. I see a lot of ego around training and
Yeah.
projects.
Uh-huh.
In a sense, I see the same old sort of top-down, profit-driven ethic.
Yeah.
So, that's another schema or fracture in my attempt to get whole,
Yeah.
is because I'm dealing with what I would see as a male-centric practice.
Yeah.
How do you see this permaculture? Do you see it as a male-centric, non-ritualized new agriculture, if I can put it all together? How do you see it?
That's a really good question. There's probably, I mean, some people will find that as their point of entry. For me, it's not that. And I took my Permaculture Design Certificate from Starhawk and Eric Olson and Ben Farrer and folks like that. And Starhawk, as part of the PDC and the Earth Activist training, they had three elements. One was the technical discussion, the science of permaculture, the soil and all that. The second was ritual. And for Starhawk, it was about magic and about, natural forces. And the third was Earth Activist training, which was, how do you resist the dominant forces on the planet today? And all three of those were part of that PDC. But in answer to your question, I think most people who enter, no matter what your point of entry, whether you enter because you like fungi and you understand the soil science and all that, I think there's an importance to that science. But however you enter, you're going to find that there's still a spiritual dimension that you need, and how that plays out for us, I don't know. I think permaculture, I personally think that permaculture is about entering into nature, and as you enter in, you're going to want ways to ritualize what you're experiencing and ways to celebrate. Celebration has to be a part of it, and all of those are very feminine. I think there's a balance between the masculine and the feminine that needs to happen. And because in our world the masculine, the dominance is so clear, the feminine tends to rise up it needs to have more emphasis than it would otherwise, but there needs to be a balance. And I've met most of the men that I've met that have been engaged in gardens and in permaculture have been really gentle souls because they spend their time cultivating life in the garden. And when they get into talking about who knows more about soil, they they do that. But there's a gentleness, and I think you'll find, and I've spent a little bit of time studying with some Jungians. There needs to be a balance between the masculine and feminine, and you need the strong masculine. You need the good masculine to really emerge, which is cultivating and caring, and you also need the feminine to be powerful. It's not just a submissive feminine. It's a power dark and a power of earth and life, and that needs to emerge, and we're going to find spiritual ways to celebrate that and to cultivate that in ourselves. People are working on it now, and there's going to be more and more ritual, I think, and more ways to do that. Some of us are trying to figure it out for ourselves, and as we do, we'll write about it and pull people together.
Yeah. Have you seen any tangible examples of new stories, symbols, things that are adding sort of gusto to a new mythology of permaculture? The elements of the narrative?
Well, not that I could speak definitively about. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of the seed as an example, the seed and new life, water. Some of this isn't new, is the thing. When you ask the question, what are new? There's a science to it. The newest thing I've found is the new story, the new cosmology of the universe. We now know a lot more about how the universe was born and evolved over time. So this idea of evolution, of us being spiritual beings evolving, and Earth has now evolved to the point where it has a consciousness to it in the form of the human, probably in the form of dolphins too, for that matter, but certainly in the form of the human. So this idea of evolution as being a spiritual act, not just something that happened, and that by participating in our own individual evolution, we're also participating in the evolution of the planet. So evolution as a symbol. The seed obviously is the big one for me. The seed is being sacred. Soil is being sacred. And right. The elements that bring all of that to life, the water, the air, fire, etc. So the classic four elements.
It seems that when you talk about tradition in your book, tradition has led us to the brink of extinction, and tradition can also be rechanneled and recreated to help us evolve in better ways.
I agree. It's kind of like technology, isn't it?
Yeah, it's how you use it, I guess.
Yeah, it's how you use it. I mean, I'm looking at technology, and I spent a good part of my life devoted to energy technology, networking technology, because I felt at the time technology was the answer, and I certainly learned that my ladder was against the wrong wall there. I was climbing on that wall and realized, oh my gosh, technology is not going to save us. The human has to shift. There's a new consciousness that's required in order that we use the technology in ways that would be helpful as opposed to harmful to the planet and to ourselves. But and I think that's true of tradition as well. And you'll find, I mean, in every faith tradition, you'll find that the mystics, the nature mystics in particular, probably had more in common with each other than they did with the rigid side of their own faith tradition. You have the Sufi mystics and the Jewish mystics and the Christian mystics. I mean, St. Francis was entering into nature, and nature healed him and transformed him into someone who literally transformed the church. At the time, the church thought that poor people were evil. They were poor because they deserved it. And he came in and said, no, they're Jesus. And so and it was nature that transformed his point of view. So, in each of those faith traditions, you've got these nature mystics that really somehow were able to tap into the greater wisdom. And, we're going to be moving forward, not backward. I'm of the view that it's not as much as what we believe as who we are and what we experience. And that's why I think permaculture is so important. I think people will be open to new ways of thinking only after they have had new ways of being. So the ritual will give us that opportunity. If we can enter into nature and come up with rituals that allow us to sort of change internally, our ways of thinking will change too.
Well, let's project a slight bit here. If we have a convergence and the weekend includes dancing around the maypole or throwing seeds up in the air and sort of some goddess ritual, is that what we're talking about here? Is that really going to work for people from God knows where?
Well,
I mean, We're not all Starhawk. We just can't all do
Yeah,
that.
that's right. And I guess I'm back to that'll work for some people. I mean, some folks are going to need that to sort of celebrate their life and where they're at. Um,
Mm.
we're talking about sort of how do you convert it, how do you convert the whole of humanity, and it's going to be more than just dancing around the maypole. Um, it's going to have to be through some of, and I think you're already beginning to see it. You have the major religious leaders of the world, the Desmond Tutus and the um, Dalai Lama, and you've got people saying, look, the major religions need to address our relationship with Earth and with each other. And how come the major faith traditions don't have that narrative figured out? And and it was Thomas Berry who's begun to describe what that might look like. He died a couple of years ago now, or a few years ago. But he was really challenging the current traditional faith communities to step up and understand what the new cosmology is telling us, and also what has to happen within those faith traditions in order to move the rest of humanity forward. A lot of folks aren't going to start by dancing around the maypole or throwing seeds in the air, but they do know. I think everybody knows that there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like the start of this ritual is to gather and turn the soil and plant the seed and harvest and remember this process again. Perhaps it's going back to remember and then putting a new shine on it or something.
Yeah.
The ritual is already there for us. We just don't practice it, I think.
Exactly. And also food. I mean, it centers on food as being sacred and the act of eating being something that's a sacred act. And, we started this interview with discussion about the community. There are a lot of people out there that are hungry. And the food that they're getting, from the industrial food system is less than satisfying. They have to eat 10 times more to get the nutrients that we used to be able to get. And so as we create better and better food and we share it, in my view, that may be the point of entry. This act of sharing food around the table. And, there's at least one faith tradition, in fact, probably many, that the act of sharing food with each other is part of the sacred ritual. So it is a ritual to sit around a table and eat a meal together. And maybe that's where we start. I mean, for me, that's been a place to start with the family and with those in the community. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why these transition towns, I think they've got it right with the potlucks and sharing the food. I think that's important.
Denise, why don't we end today by some reflection or discussion of your book and why you wrote it and how we can grab a copy of it.
Okay. It's called I got it here, right here. It's called Tending the Soul's Garden, Permaculture as a Way Forward in Difficult Times. The reason I wrote it is I found it was really a personal journey in a way. I've spent some time struggling with the industrial system that we're in and my role in it, and I realized that things needed to change, and I didn't know how to change personally, and how to re-enter into something different or enter into something different. And so this is really a story. It's a summary of the permaculture principles from that point of view. How do you face the times that we're in? A while back, I saw an interview of John Seed. I don't know if you know John Seed. He works with Joanna Macy, and Joanna Macy and John Seed have been talking about the great turning. The human being is in a time of tremendous change right now. And in this interview, he was absolutely joyful. They were talking about the state of the world, and at the time I saw the interview, I was thoroughly depressed. I was like, we're so, we're in trouble. And I saw this interview, and here was this man who absolutely in his heart knew we were in trouble, and yet he was in this joyful state of saying, I'm doing the work I'm meant to be doing. Things are going to be what they are, but I know that I'm meant to be doing this. And I thought, wow, how do I go from this worry and state, thinking about how bad things are to transforming to something that is positive. And I look around and there's so many young people that are absolutely desperate for hope, and they're desperate for a positive way forward. And so I wrote the book as my own story, but also as a sort of, it's like a summary, it's a guide of what I learned along the way. I feel that permaculture offers us a way to enter the world at a time when the world really needs people to be authentic and life-giving and create life. And it gives us a place to go and focus our energies as opposed to focusing our thoughts on everything that's wrong.
Tell me quickly what the soul is. How do you define the soul? Where is it?
I define
it.
I don't have a definition other than it's this life force in us that doesn't have any other name that I could give it. It's not the ego and it's not the mind. It's this thing within us that wants to live and wants us to live, and it's probably much bigger than any name I could give it. But but it's a way to allow that energy to emerge, that life-giving energy within us.
Well, I think that's the end of this interview. Hey, I appreciate it, and I'll look forward to meeting you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.